They laughed at his grandfather's hunting rifle and called it a museum piece that belonged in an antique shop, not on a shooting range. The young hunters who mocked the old man's weathered bolt-action rifle had no idea they were looking at the weapon that held the Marine Corps Scout Sniper record for the longest confirmed kill at 2,147 yards. Welcome to Stories from Us. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden legends and military excellence, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These moments matter more than you know. Earl McKenzie was 74 years old and had been a regular at Pine Ridge Hunting Lodge for over a decade, returning every hunting season with the same quiet demeanor and the same rifle he'd carried for more than 50 years. With gray hair, weathered hands, and a calm presence that spoke of someone who had seen more than most people could imagine, Earl was the kind of guest that lodge staff appreciated, respectful, self-sufficient, and never demanding special attention. The rifle that Earl brought with him every year was a source of gentle amusement among the other hunters who frequented Pine Ridge. It was a 1960s-era Remington 700 with a custom walnut stock that had been worn smooth by decades of use, topped with a fixed-power scope that looked primitive compared to the high-tech optics that dominated modern hunting. The metal showed honest wear from years of careful maintenance, and everything about the weapon suggested that it had been built in an era when craftsmanship mattered more than cutting-edge technology. This year's hunting party included 5 young men in their 30s who represented the new generation of hunters: Tyler Brooks, Marcus Johnson, Jake Anderson, Danny Miller, and Chris Wilson. They arrived at the lodge with equipment that looked like it belonged in a military special operations unit: precision rifles with adjustable stocks, advanced optics with multiple magnification settings, computerized rangefinders, ballistic calculators, and ammunition that had been hand-loaded to match the specific characteristics of their weapons. The contrast between Earl's simple setup and the young hunter's high-tech arsenal was striking, and it didn't go unnoticed by the group. They had encountered Earl during previous hunting seasons and had always been polite, but they viewed him as a relic from a bygone era, someone who represented the old ways of hunting that had been superseded by modern innovation and scientific precision. "Look at that old rifle," Tyler whispered to his companions as Earl unpacked his gear in the lodge's gunroom. "That thing probably belongs in a museum next to a Civil War musket." "My grandfather had something similar," Marcus added with a chuckle. "I think he bought it when Eisenhower was president. How does anyone expect to make accurate shots with equipment that old?" "Check out that scope," Jake pointed out with barely concealed amusement. "I've got more magnification in my binoculars than he's got in his sight. How can he even see targets at hunting distances?" Earl overheard these conversations but never responded to them. He simply continued with his methodical preparation routine, cleaning his rifle with the same care that a surgeon might show while preparing instruments, checking his ammunition with the precision of someone who understood that consistency in small details led to success in larger endeavors, and organizing his gear with the efficiency that comes from decades of experience. On the shooting range that Pine Ridge maintained for guest practice, the generational differences became even more apparent. The young hunters took advantage of the controlled environment to showcase their modern equipment, setting up electronic devices that measured wind speed, humidity, and elevation, then using ballistic calculators to determine precise adjustments for their scopes. They fired at targets at 300, 500, and 800 yards, making impressive groups that demonstrated both their skill and the capabilities of their equipment. Earl used the same range for his practice sessions, but his approach was fundamentally different. He fired his old rifle using nothing more than his eyes to judge wind conditions, his experience to estimate range, and mental calculations that he performed with the automatic precision of someone who had done these computations thousands of times before. His groups were consistently tight, with every shot landing exactly where he intended, but he never made a show of his accuracy or sought attention for his performance. "Those have got to be lucky shots," Danny observed after watching Earl place 5 consecutive rounds through the same hole at 500 yards. "There's no way that antique rifle can maintain that kind of precision consistently." "He's probably got that thing sighted for one specific distance," Chris suggested. Real precision shooting requires the kind of adjustability that only modern equipment can provide. The comments continued throughout the week, but Earl maintained his customary silence. He was there to hunt, to enjoy the solitude of the wilderness, and to use skills that had once defined his life in a context that was purely recreational. The last thing he wanted was to draw attention to himself or to explain the background that had made those skills possible. The confrontation that would change everything began on the third evening, when the hunters had gathered in the lodge's bar after a day in the field. The combination of alcohol and the easy camaraderie that develops among hunting parties had loosened tongues and inflated egos, creating the perfect conditions for someone to cross the line from gentle teasing to direct challenge. "Earl," Tyler called out, raising his beer in a mock toast, "that rifle of yours is really something special. A genuine antique piece, right?" Earl looked up from his own beer, which he had been nursing for the better part of an hour. "It's been in the family for generations." "Ever think about upgrading to something from this century?" Marcus asked with a grin that was meant to be friendly, but carried an undertone of condescension. "Modern rifles are so much more accurate and efficient." "This one has always served me well," Earl replied in the same calm tone he had used throughout the week. "Come on, old-timer," Jake interjected, emboldened by the laughter of his companions. "You can't seriously believe that museum piece can compete with real precision equipment. That thing probably couldn't hit the broadside of a barn at 500 yards. For the first time since arriving at the lodge, Earl's expression shifted slightly. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not anger, but perhaps the faintest suggestion that he was capable of more than his quiet demeanor suggested. "Tell you what," Danny said, alcohol courage overriding the wisdom that might have counseled restraint. "How about we settle this with a little friendly competition? Tomorrow morning, let's see how that antique performs against real equipment." "What kind of competition did you have in mind?" Earl asked quietly. "Long-range shooting," Tyler replied. "Something that will really test the capabilities of our equipment, let's say 1,000 yards, my rifle against your museum piece." Earl considered the proposal for a moment, then set down his beer with deliberate care. "If we're going to make it interesting, let's make it challenging. 2,000 yards. The bar fell silent. 2,000 yards was nearly 1.2 miles, a distance that approached the extreme limits of what was possible with civilian hunting equipment, and that required the kind of precision shooting typically associated with military snipers rather than recreational hunters. 2,000 yards? Marcus laughed, though there was a nervous edge to his amusement. "Old man, that's almost military sniper territory. Nobody shoots hunting rifles at that distance." "Are you seriously suggesting that you can make accurate shots at 2,000 yards with that antique?" Jake asked, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and mockery. "My rifle can handle it," Earl said simply. "The question is whether you and your modern equipment are up to the challenge." The gauntlet had been thrown down, and there was no way for the young hunters to back down without losing face. Tyler nodded with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't meet with superior equipment and natural talent. "You're on, old-timer. 2,000 yards, winner takes. Let's make it interesting. $1,000. "Deal," Earl agreed. Word of the competition spread quickly through the lodge, and by dawn, the next morning, a crowd had gathered to witness what promised to be either an impressive demonstration of marksmanship or a humbling lesson for an elderly man who had overestimated his abilities. The lodge staff had worked before sunrise to set up a target at exactly 2,000 yards, using surveying equipment to ensure the distance was precise and establishing spotting positions with high-powered telescopes that would allow observers to see the results of each shot. The weather conditions were nearly perfect for long-range shooting: minimal wind, clear visibility, and stable atmospheric pressure that would provide consistent ballistic performance. Tyler had spent an hour preparing his equipment, using electronic devices to measure every environmental variable and inputting the data into ballistic calculators that would provide precise adjustments for his scope. Tyler took the first series of shots, settling into a professional shooting position with his state-of-the-art Bergara rifle, premium Schmidt and Bender scope, and hand-loaded ammunition that had been precisely calibrated for long-range accuracy. The crowd watched through spotting scopes as his shots impacted near the target. The first shot missed entirely, The second caught the edge of the target, and the third landed in the outer rings. "Not bad for hunting equipment," Tyler said, though his tone suggested disappointment with his performance. "That's about as good as you can expect at this distance with civilian rifles." Now it was Earl's turn. Earl approached the firing line with his weathered Remington 700, moving with the deliberate precision of someone who had performed this ritual countless times before. He settled into a prone position, adjusted his rifle with subtle movements that spoke of muscle memory developed over decades, and began his preparation for what everyone assumed would be a futile attempt to match the performance of modern equipment. But Earl's preparation was different from Tyler's high-tech approach. He didn't use electronic devices to measure wind speed or atmospheric conditions. Instead, he observed the movement of grass and leaves at various distances, noted the behavior of dust and debris, and processed environmental information using senses that had been trained to detect subtleties that instruments couldn't measure. The spectators began to whisper among themselves as Earl took his time, some wondering if the elderly man was having second thoughts about the challenge, others speculating about whether he truly understood the difficulty of what he was attempting. Earl controlled his breathing, found his natural point of aim, and applied steady pressure to his trigger with the smooth consistency that comes from having performed the same motion thousands of times under conditions far more stressful than a recreational shooting competition. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The spotter with the high-powered telescope immediately focused on the target, scanning for the impact point that would determine whether Earl's shot had been anywhere close to successful. "Perfect bullseye!" the spotter announced, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and disbelief. The crowd fell silent. A perfect hit at 2,000 yards was the kind of shooting that belonged in military record books, not civilian competitions. "That has to be beginner's luck," Tyler said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments earlier. "There's no way he can do that consistently. Try it again." Earl chambered another round, settled back into his shooting position, and repeated his methodical preparation routine. The second shot produced another perfect bullseye, followed by a third shot that was equally precise. Lodge owner Bill Richardson approached Earl with an expression of genuine awe. "Earl, that's absolutely incredible shooting. I've never seen anything like it. Where on earth did you learn to shoot like that?" Earl stood up slowly, shouldering his rifle with the same care he had shown throughout the week. "United States Marine Corps, 1968 to 1988, Scout Sniper." The revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Marine Scout snipers represented the absolute elite of military marksmanship, warriors who were selected from the best Marines and trained to standards that civilian shooters rarely approached. "My longest confirmed kill," Earl continued matter-of-factly, "was 2,147 yards, Afghanistan, 1987, with this rifle." Tyler's face had gone pale as the implications of Earl's statement sank in. You're a Marine Scout sniper? An actual military sniper?" "Was," Earl corrected. "Gunnery Sergeant Earl McKenzie, retired." Lodge manager Sarah Collins quickly pulled out her smartphone and began searching for information. Within moments, she had found military records and historical accounts that confirmed Earl's identity and service record. "Holy shit," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Gunnery Sergeant Earl McKenzie, Marine Corps Scout Sniper record holder, longest confirmed kill in Corps history, multiple tours in Vietnam, Lebanon, Grenada, and classified operations in Afghanistan. The young hunters stood in stunned silence as the reality of their situation became clear. They had been mocking and challenging one of the most legendary marksmen in Marine Corps history, a man whose shooting skills had been proven in combat conditions that would have broken most people. "Sir," Jake said, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility, "we had no idea who you were. We owe you a sincere apology for our disrespect." "You weren't supposed to know," Earl replied with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the week. "I came here to hunt deer and enjoy the wilderness, not to relive old wars or impress people with stories from my past." "But why do you still use that old rifle?" Danny asked, his curiosity overcoming his embarrassment. "With your skills, you could have any equipment you wanted." Earl looked down at his Remington 700, running his hand along the worn stock with obvious affection. This rifle has been with me through more combat operations than I care to remember. She saved my life more times than I can count, and she's never let me down when it mattered. Why would I replace something that's never failed me?" Tyler approached with genuine respect, extending his hand in a gesture that acknowledged his earlier mistake. "Sir, I owe you not only an apology, but also $1,000, and more importantly, I owe you the respect that your service and expertise deserve." "Keep your money, son," Earl said, accepting the handshake, "but maybe this experience will teach you not to judge equipment or people based on their appearance. The newest and most expensive gear isn't always the best tool for the job." Would you be willing to teach us?" Marcus asked hesitantly. "Real marksmanship, I mean. The fundamentals that made you capable of what we just witnessed." Earl considered the request carefully. "Marksmanship isn't about having the most advanced equipment or the latest technology. It's about understanding the fundamentals, proper breathing, natural point of aim, trigger control, and the mental discipline that comes from thousands of hours of practice. Those are things you can't buy in a store or download from the internet." For the remainder of the week, Earl became the unofficial instructor for the group of young hunters who had challenged him. He taught them the fundamentals of precision shooting, how to control their breathing to minimize the effect of their heartbeat on their aim, how to find and maintain a natural point of aim that didn't require muscular tension, how to apply consistent trigger pressure that wouldn't disturb their sight alignment, and how to develop the mental discipline that separated exceptional marksmen from merely good shooters. "Your high-tech rifles and advanced optics are excellent tools," Earl explained during one of their training sessions. "But all the technology in the world can't compensate for poor fundamentals. The equipment doesn't make the shot, the shooter does. Everything else is just tools to help you apply the basics more effectively." By the end of their week at Pine Ridge, the young hunters had developed a completely different perspective on both Earl and the nature of true expertise. They had learned that mastery wasn't about having the latest equipment or the most impressive credentials. It was about understanding fundamentals at such a deep level that they became second nature, even under the most challenging circumstances. Earl returned home carrying the same weathered rifle and maintaining the same quiet demeanor that had characterized his visit. But at Pine Ridge Hunting Lodge, he had achieved something approaching legendary status, not because he had sought recognition or tried to impress anyone, but simply because he had demonstrated what genuine expertise looked like when it was applied with humility and precision. The young hunters left the lodge with a valuable lesson that extended far beyond marksmanship. Never underestimate someone based on their equipment, their appearance, or their willingness to let their actions speak louder than their words. Real skill doesn't need the latest technology to prove itself, and true masters often prefer the tools that have served them faithfully over the years to the newest innovations that promise to make difficult things easy. Earl McKenzie never needed modern equipment to be a master marksman, never needed recognition to validate his expertise, and never needed to announce his capabilities to prove his worth. He found excellence in fundamentals, whether calculating precise shots under combat pressure or quietly practicing the skills that had once meant the difference between life and death. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about what people accomplish when everyone is watching. They're about how they carry their mastery, how they choose to share their knowledge, and how they demonstrate that true expertise doesn't depend on having the newest tools or the loudest voice. They're about the quiet masters who walk among us, carrying capabilities we never think to ask about, ready to show us what real skill looks like when it's applied with precision and humility. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Earl McKenzie? Someone whose modest equipment concealed extraordinary expertise, whose quiet demeanor masked world-class capabilities? Share their name in the comments. Tell us how they taught you that mastery comes from understanding fundamentals, that the newest tools can't replace proper training, and that the most impressive skills are often carried by the most humble people. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to help us honor the quiet masters and hidden legends who deserve to be remembered. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember, the next time you see someone using old-fashioned equipment with quiet confidence, look a little closer. You might be watching a master craftsman whose skills were earned in places where precision meant survival.